everybody else. That's the nature of the system. And that's all over the place. I mean, education, television, everywhere you look. Huge forces trying to drive you to that. And it works to a large extent. These are very atomized societies by now, the kind of organizations that held people together and gave them opportunities to work in solidarity with others for the common good. Those have eroded. They're under severe attack from unions in particular. In the United States, the practically got destroyed. Canada still somewhat survived. The same was true of political organizations. We don't really have political organizations, political parties, which have the positions that people can participate in forming. But we have a system in which you can push a button to select a candidate who's been vetted by private capital. We make fun of the Iranian elections because the candidates have to pass through the Guardian Council of Clerics. But in the United States, and to a large extent Canada, the candidates have to pass the bar of being accepted by concentrated private capital. Overwhelmingly, you just can't even make it begin to get into the system unless you have vast capital resources. And in the system, that's how you get positions in chair of the House and Congress and so on and so forth. And then the population is allowed to pick once in a while within this narrow range of choices. So, but the kinds of participation and organizations which could overcome the apathy that derives from hopelessness, they've been eroded, and the thing to do was reconstruction. And the apathy disappeared.
Well, that actually brings us to another key question. Wanting to know what are the most effective ways that people can make corporations like Shell, Nestle, and Monsanto publicly accountable for their unethical practices and essentially rein them in so they don't do quite as much damage, whether it's the population, the environment, or nature?
Well, the main way to deal with that problem is just simply get rid of them, have them placed under public control. There's no reason in economics or morality or anything else that says that there should be private tyrannies, and they are tyrannies, and they're about as close to totalitarian as any institution that humans have contrived. You get orders from the top, you hand it down to below, and so on. At the bottom, you can rent yourself to them. So there's no reason, and in fact, by law, they are bound to serve the interests of owners, shareholders. No principle that says that. They could just as well be, as far as the principles that, you can even read this in the business literature, they can just as well be required to take into account to serve the interests of what are called stakeholders of the workforce and the community. And in fact, that should be running them. That's a traditional view of the workers' movements on the left. Those who work in the mills ought to own them back in the 19th century, right up until today. So the best answer to the question is get rid of them, turn them into democratic institutions, which are popularly controlled and which the public can make use of to serve common interests. Well, okay, that's a long step, but not one that should be overlooked. A shorter step is just to make life hard for them, and make life hard for them to do what they do, just as the way you would do it with any other totalitarian institution. If you're living in a totalitarian state, you make use of what opportunities there are to restrict the power of the authorities. And you can do that with these tyrannies too, things like shareholder protests, boycotts, demonstrations, efforts to change legislation to bar their more destructive practices and so on. There's a range of possibilities available, limited, it's there. And there's the longer-term goal of the usual goal of simply eliminating tyrannical and illegitimate institutions.
I think we have time for one more general question. Around the world, in North America and around the world, what political, economic, and social developments do you see that are actually giving people hope, that provide potential for transcending the various crises that we're all facing?
Quite few. Take, say, the environmental movement. Say the movement which in Canada is substantially led by First Nations, but others participate. And it's found all over the place. And so in the countries that have large indigenous populations, like Ecuador and Bolivia, there are significant steps being taken to preserve what's called rights of nature. That's expanding the concept of rights from free property men on through women, non-white, non-property animals up to nature, which also has rights that we better defend, or else we will all be in trouble. So, for example, to be concrete, in Ecuador, with a large indigenous population, the government did attempt to get aid from the rich countries, mostly the European Union, to allow them to keep their oil resources underground, which is where they ought to be. Well, the rich countries weren't willing to give the aid, so they're now exploiting the oil and destroying the environment like everyone else. But at least there are pressures. The human rights and civil rights movements are other significant cases. These proliferation of cooperatives and worker-owned enterprises, I think, are quite significant. The student protests over ranging from exorbitant, oppressive tuition increases, just the technique of control and indoctrination, on to broader rights. Those are positive developments. Very striking development, the one I mentioned earlier, is the liberation of South America from Western control. Just 10 years. That's a change of really historic significance. 500 years of subordination to Western power and to mostly white, tiny elites within has been significantly eroded. That's a positive development. And everywhere you look, there are things like this happening. They haven't gotten to the point where they're radically changing the world, but I think those are the kind of bits and pieces that can combine together and grow to lead to the kinds of significant change that are desperately needed at this point.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Noam. On behalf of Langara students and the rest of us, we want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas.